And I just want to take a little bit of time this morning to do just that, just to remember what God has actually done for us as his people. But before we do that, I want to read from a passage in Joshua. And so in Joshua, essentially what's happened in the story so far is Moses has gone and led the people out of Egypt, and they've wandered around in the wilderness for 40 years, and now Moses has died. And this is Joshua chapter 1. And the leadership of the nation falls to Joshua. And the Lord commands Joshua to be bold and courageous, and that he is going to lead the people into the promised land. And so what he does is they stand at the edge of the Jordan River. And when they stand at the edge of the Jordan River, as soon as the feet touch the edge of the river stops flowing, and a wall of water builds up on one side and allows the nation to actually walk through on dry land. And we're going to pick up this story in Joshua chapter 4. And we're going to read it. And we're going to remember what the Lord has done for his people in this part of the story. He says in Joshua 4 verse 1, it says, "After the entire nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord spoke to Joshua. Choose 12 men from the people, 1 man for each tribe, and command them, take 12 stones from this place in the middle of the Jordan, where the priests are standing. Carry them with you and set them down at the place where you spend the night." So Joshua summoned the 12 men he had selected from the Israelites, 1 man for each tribe, and said to them, "Go across to the ark of the Lord, your God, in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you lift a stone on his shoulder, 1 for each of the Israelite tribes, so that this will be a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean to you?' you should tell them, 'The water of the Jordan was cut off in front of the ark of the Lord's covenant when it crossed the Jordan. The Jordan's water was cut off. Therefore, these stones will always be a memorial for the Israelites.'" The Israelites did just as Joshua had commanded them. The 12 men took stones from the middle of the Jordan, 1 for each of the tribes, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the camp and set them down there. Joshua also set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing. The stones are still there today. The priests carrying the ark continued standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything was completed that the Lord had commanded Joshua to tell the people, in keeping with all that Moses had commanded Joshua. The people hurried across, and after everyone had finished crossing, the priests with the ark of the Lord crossed in the sight of the people. The Reubenites, Gadites, half the tribe of Manasseh went into battle formation in front of the Israelites, as Moses had instructed them. About 40,000 equipped for war crossed to the plains of Jericho in the Lord's presence. On that day, the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they revered him throughout his life as they had revered Moses. The Lord told Joshua, "Command the priests who carry the ark of the testimony to come up from the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priests, "Come up from the Jordan." When the priests carrying the ark of the Lord's covenant came up from the middle of the Jordan, and their feet stepped out onto solid ground, the water of the Jordan resumed its course, flowing over all the banks as before. The people came up from Jordan on the 10th day of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern limits of Jericho. When Joshua set up Gilgal, the 12 stones they had taken from Jordan, and he said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your children ask their fathers, 'What is the meaning of these stones?' you should tell your children, 'Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the water in the Jordan before you until you had crossed over, just as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed over. This is so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord's hand is mighty, and so that you may always fear the Lord your God." So why? Why is remembering what the Lord has done so important? Why is being intentional about remembering what the Lord has done so important in the life of his people? Well, partly, and I would say very much in my case, we are very much prone to forget. We're very much prone to forget. If you remember the story of the Israelites, they've come out of Egypt, and they're not even out of Egypt for maybe 3 days, and they begin to complain. They begin to complain about, well, the food's not as good here. We want to go back. That things are hard out here in the wilderness. Even after the Lord had delivered them from their slavery, delivered them from their bondage with many mighty signs and wonders by destroying Egypt, by the plagues. They had witnessed these signs and wonders at the hand of God. They had witnessed these mighty works that God had done on their behalf. And yet, even a short while later, they had already forgotten and began to complain and began to grumble. In Hebrews, it reflects on this, I believe in Hebrews 6, about those who once began the journey of faith, but then grumbled in the wilderness and were destroyed themselves. We are so prone to forget what God has done. And this is why I think it's important that at memorial times, at special times and special places, it's important for us to remember what God has done, so that we won't forget what he has done on our behalf, and so that when we step out into the future and we walk into the future, we can remember what he has done in the past, and with faithful and hopeful expectation, we can trust that the Lord our God will be faithful to us in the future as well. Remembering what he has done helps us to faithfully look with expectation to the future. And so, this morning we're asking ourselves the question, well, what has the Lord done for us? What has the Lord done for us? Now, I'm sure that in your own individual lives, in your own individual walks with the Lord, I'm sure he has done amazing things for each of you as individuals. But we're not talking about individuals here necessarily this morning. We're talking about our corporate story here as a church. What has God done for us? And I want to recount to you here this morning some of the things these last 2 years that God has done for us, so that we can remember and we can rejoice and we can celebrate what he's done, so that when he calls us to do mighty things, great things in the future, we can remember that he's been faithful in the past and trust that he will be faithful to his promise, faithful to his word into the future. And so here's some things that the Lord has done for us. Almost 2 years ago now, T.S. and I resigned from our previous church. And to take a very complex and difficult and painful story as succinct and as peaceable as possible, essentially what had happened is T.S. and I had broken with the tradition that the church had been raised with and was used to and found acceptable. And I say that only because if any of those brothers or sisters hear this or listen to this, I'm sure they would phrase it differently, but I don't at all want to slander them or say ill things about them, because God loves them. We love them. And even to this day, we pray for reconciliation with them. But Tina and I, we broke with the tradition that the church had been raised with, and that led to us resigning and leaving that church. When we left that church, both Tina and I were in maybe two different minds. For my sake, I had assumed that I was out of the ministry. I assumed I was done. I'd sort of planned to take maybe a month off and then go find a job somewhere, pushing papers across a desk or something. I had no idea what God had for me next. I assumed I was out of the ministry. I know Tina had planned to go traveling and to go visit some ministries all around the world to see what God was doing in other places and that sort of stuff. But when we resigned on that Sunday morning, neither of us had in our minds that we would be planting a church the following week. What God did for us is when we resigned, he had already been preparing a place for us to go. He had been preparing a place for us to go. You see, 3 weeks previous to our resignation at our church, the Lord had actually spoken to some elders at another church that we didn't really have, I didn't even know existed. And essentially, the essence of what the Lord had spoken to them from a prophet from overseas is that there was going to be a people coming out of a church, and they were going to need a place of refuge. And that when you find these people, you're to give them your building to use. And so when they heard about what had happened at our church, they contacted us. And they met with us. And they said, we believe you're those people, and we want you to use our building. This is on the Monday evening, after the Sunday we had resigned. We had no plans to plant a church. And yet already God was making a place of refuge for us. And so we thanked them, and we were prayerfully considering it, and a number of other different words came from people who weren't necessarily involved in the situation, and it led us to believe that maybe God was doing something here. And so we met the following Sunday in that building. So this morning I just want to remember what the Lord has done for us as his people. He's provided a place of refuge for us, a proverbial ark, if you will, to carry us through those times of chaos. Now, for many of you here, you didn't walk through that journey with us, and that's perfectly okay. But this is why they set up the remembrance stones, is so that future generations and future people who would come and join the people, that they could also remember the story that they are now a part of as well. And so that some 2 years ago, God provided a place of refuge for us in that Romanian Pentecostal church down Kingston Road. And we were there for 4.5 months. Which brings me to the second stone, if you will, of things I want to remember this morning. He not only provided a place of refuge out of the midst of the chaos, he gave us, from that place of refuge, he gave us a home. You see, we had been in that place, I can't remember how long it was exactly, but we had just started meeting, and even at this point, we weren't sure exactly what God was doing. We didn't have a name. For those of you who were there that first Sunday, I remember standing up and saying, "Welcome to church." We didn't have a name. I said, "My name's Patrick. I'm nobody here. If this is your first time, me too." So we didn't know what God was doing. We didn't know what God was doing. We'd even talked about how maybe what God's doing is that there's a bunch of people here who are very hurt by this whole situation. Maybe we're just giving them some space to just heal a bit before we kind of shepherd them out into congregations around the place. Maybe that's what God is doing, and maybe that's what God's calling us to do in this season. But not long after we had started this process, and we're still kind of trying to work out what God is doing with us, we got a call from the Salvation Army, who used to own this building. And long story short, a while ago now, we had been in contact with them about purchasing the building because we needed a bigger space. And they were always yep, we want to sell, yep, we're going to sell, yep, but nothing ever came of it. There was always roadblock after roadblock, stall after stall. Nothing was ever coming of it. And so we had kind of just abandoned the project, that it was never going to come to fruition, that, we had to look elsewhere, whatever it was. And we certainly weren't thinking about a building project in the midst of our place of refuge and what God was doing. But it was, I'm going to say, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks after we had our first service as what would become Gracehouse, the Salvation Army contacted us and said, "We're ready to sell. Are you ready to buy?" And I remember we were sitting at, I don't know, maybe like a McDonald's or a cafe or something like that, and we're like, well, it's a big building and we're maybe 40 or 50 people. But it seemed like it's what God wanted for us. And so we said yes. And so this morning, we celebrate the fact that not only did God provide us a place of refuge out of the chaos in that Romanian Pentecostal church, that they were so kind to us, so gracious to us in the midst of our distress, but then he provided us a home of our own here in this building. I have children, so I have a dad license, okay? Our little slice of paradise. For those of you who don't know the address, this is Paradise Road. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you. He's also a father. He gets it. My wife is cringing. But he provided us a home. Miraculously, He's provided us a home here. And so this morning in our 2-year anniversary, we celebrate not only the fact that He's provided us a home, but He provided us the means to actually to clean this place up, to give it a fresh lick of paint. So much work has gone into this place to make it a beautiful space to meet. And we want to celebrate that this morning. We want to celebrate all the wonderful people, the gifted and talented people that He has brought into our midst that helped make this building what it is, that helped make this church what it is. We have an absolute glut of talented people in this church. An absolute glut of talented people. We have so many good, quality people in this church. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous how good we have it here. And so this morning we celebrate. We celebrate and we remember that God gave us a home. The next stone of remembrance, as it were, was at the start of 2020, where the Lord gave us wisdom. Not perfect wisdom, but we had just acquired this building. We moved in on the first weekend of December. We had the first Sunday of December, we had it in this building. And we met, and there was all this enthusiasm, and there was all this energy behind, we've got a building now. What are we going to do? The world is our oyster. We could do anything. We've got the space. We could have all sorts of ministries, all sorts of activities. We could get it all done. What do we do? What are we going to be doing? And in a very real way, it felt like there was a little bit of pressure. Well, we got to do something now. And we very much wanted to do something. But we prayed. And we felt like the Lord told us that He wanted us to wait upon Him. That He wants us to take a season of simply learning to stop and wait upon Him. And that in this season, about 12 months or so, we believed it would be, like the whole next year, that whole year, we would be in a season of waiting upon Him, and He would begin to shape our culture, that He would begin to teach us to listen more closely to His voice. And so we stood up on our Vision Sunday and said, with this brand new building and all this excitement, for this next year, we're going to do nothing. It was very anticlimactic. But that was in January of 2020. And now we see, in retrospect, that we could have put a lot of time, effort, and energy, resources into getting ministries, getting programs, getting all these things started, only for them to have to stop short in February because we had a global pandemic. I want to just celebrate the fact that God leads His people in wisdom. It's not some superior strategy that Tinas and I have. It's not that at all. But the Lord gives wisdom and He gives guidance. And the last stone of remembrance I want to sort of highlight to us this morning is that out of the chaos, He gave us a place of refuge. And from that place of refuge, He gave us a home. And towards the end of last year and the start of this year, He began to speak to us about community. And He's been teaching us this year about community. Painfully, slowly. Too slow for some people sometimes. But He's been teaching us about community. I want to celebrate the fact that the Lord, in His goodness, has given us family. He has made us a family. God has been so good to us at this church. So unbelievably good. And for those of you who have come along the way, maybe you've only been here 6 months, maybe you've only been here a year, and you haven't walked that entire journey with us. It's why it's important that we have these moments where we remember, so that you can also remember how God has been faithful to the church that you're a part of, faithful to the people that you're a part of, and you can celebrate with us. You can get excited with us as we look to the future and what God has for us. And so, what are we looking forward to in the future? What are we looking forward to in the future? Well, the first week that we met in this building, our first meeting was actually a Wednesday evening rather than a Sunday. We had church, obviously, the first Sunday, but it was a Wednesday evening. And we had a prayer meeting, just prayer and worship, just in the overflow room there. And as we were praying and as we were worshiping, I felt like God showed me this vision of this space. And what it looked like was the best way I can describe it is like kind of like the walls of Jerusalem. White sandstone, old block building. And there was walls all around, but the thing was, though, is that all the walls had been torn down. And there's basically just a footprint of rubble all around this space here. And I asked the Lord, well, what is it you're showing me? And I felt like what the Lord said was this place used to be a spiritual stronghold in this city. And that it's been torn down by the enemy. And that he is going to rebuild the walls. And he's going to rebuild this place into a stronghold once again. Not a stronghold for, this is me now, this is me commentating. Not a stronghold for us to wield power and influence over the city, but a stronghold for us to launch attacks against the kingdom of darkness, to love the people of this city, and that by the love of Jesus, destroy the works of darkness. I believe that's what God is doing here. That's what we believe God is doing here in our midst from this place. We believe that this place will be known as a place of prayer and worship. The Lord said that his house will be a house of prayer, and we believe that this place will be a house of prayer. It's why we have such regular prayer meetings, but we believe that those are going to increase. I don't know when they're going to increase, but we believe that they're going to increase. We believe this is going to be a place of prayer and worship. We believe that this is going to be a place of equipping, commissioning, and sending. One of the things we feel like the Lord spoke to us a good long while ago is that from this place, people would come in and they would be built up, they would be equipped, and they would be sent out. They would be raised up into their various ministries that God has for them. That they wouldn't be wielded by us as an organization, but they would be raised up and led by the Spirit, listening to his voice. They would go out into the world to do the things that God has prepared for them to do. We believe that that's what God is doing. Now, we don't know exactly how we're going to get there, but this is why it's important that we remember. When God called Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldeans, he says he called him to a land he did not know where. God is calling us to a place, and we don't know exactly how we're going to get there just yet. We've got a general vibe, a general direction of where we feel the Lord is taking us. Well, we genuinely believe God has great things planned for this people. We genuinely believe God has great things planned for us here, and the many more that are going to be coming in. And so this morning, I just want us to celebrate and to remember everything that God has done. For you personally, when you go down and you sit down at those tables down there and you're eating your meal, it might be helpful for you to recount your own personal story to people about amazing things that God has done for you in your personal life. But let's celebrate together as God's people that he delivers and he redeems. He gives us places of refuge. He brings us through the chaos waters. He gives us life. He gives us home. He gives us family. And so that when things get hard, because they will, when things are difficult, because they often are, we can look back. We can look back and say with genuine sincerity of heart, God has been faithful to us thus far. And I trust that he will be faithful into the future.